Amma ba'd, respected panel members, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The discussion concerning AhlulBayt in the eyes of non-Muslims is a discussion of fundamental importance in Islamic thought, and a discussion which requires a thorough examination, for it's a discussion which affects each and every one of our lives. A discussion from which many a lesson may be learnt and many an example may be derived, and indeed a discussion with a historical base and a contemporary significance. Whenever we look at any examination of the members of the household of the Holy Prophet, invariably, more often than not, the examination comes from a member of their religion. This would seem to be natural in the idea that the member of their religion would revere them. He'd look at them as icons, or indeed look at them as role models, or indeed he'd take them as exemplars in his life, or indeed in her life. You find that whenever we look at the biographies of Islamic personalities, many times we look through the lens of a member of the religion who's looking at a higher member of that religion. For example, we may use the works of a Muslim poet to look at a member of the household of the Prophet, or the works of a Muslim jurisprudent to look at the members of the household of the Prophet, or the works of a Muslim historian to look at the life of the members of the household of the Prophet. However, an area which is very much undervalued and an area very much underestimated is the way that non-Muslims have examined the biography of the members of the household of the Prophet. As I said, normally we look at the household of the Prophet through the eyes of Muslims. Yet unfortunately, an area which is very much underestimated is the number of non-Muslims who have been inspired by the members of the household of the Holy Prophet. The question we seek to ask is, what is it that inspired a person outside of the religion of Islam from these people who may have lived 1,000 years before them? What part of their principles inspired a person who may be a Christian to love Amir al-Mu'mineen, or who may be a Hindu to love Imam al-Hussein, or indeed maybe of the Jewish religion to love the Holy Prophet, or indeed maybe someone of the Buddhist religion but to love the supplications of Zayn al-Abidin? This area unfortunately hasn't been examined in the way it should be. And it's vital that we examine this area simply because of the fact that we live in an environment which is seen as being a cosmopolitan environment. An environment where our neighbor to our right may be a Hindu, our neighbor to our left may be a Christian, the person in front of us in the house occupied may be an atheist, and the one behind us may be a Sikh. Have any members of their religion ever been inspired by the life of the 14? Further than that, what of the life of the 14 has inspired these non-Muslims? Which anecdotes, which principles, which events allowed the non-Muslim to transcend the division of religion in order that they were able to take a humanitarian aspect from the life of the members of the household of the Prophet? Because unfortunately, we have cocooned Al-Muhammad only for our own religion. Instead of sharing them with the world, we only seek to share them with members of our own faith. When we talk about them, we talk about them as Muslim personalities, rather than as human personalities. We talk of them as Muslim role models, but we don't talk of them as human role models. This examination will seek to present a hypothesis that there needs to be a change in direction in the way the members of the household of the Prophet are viewed in this century, from rather than just being icons of the religion of Islam to being universal icons for every human being. I'm going to examine this in 3 stages. Number 1, how important is the espousing of the doctrine of social pluralism in order to ensure that AhlulBayt are known by non-Muslims? Number 2, which non-Muslim philosophers, academicians, historians, politicians were affected by AhlulBayt throughout the centuries? And number 3, in the 20th century, which famous Italian figure who had the chance to inherit a $60 billion fortune gave it up because of being inspired by the members of the household of the Prophet. Let's examine this and seek to dissect this topic in complete depth. The first area in examining AhlulBayt in the eyes of non-Muslims is looking at the importance of social pluralism. Why? Many times in our communities we hear the term religious pluralism. But unfortunately, social pluralism is not discussed as much. Religious pluralism may come to a discussion about the concept as to whether all the paths may lead to the ultimate. Whereas social pluralism examines whether we can be tolerant of all the paths. In which way? Religious pluralism may say Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, they may all find a path towards the ultimate truth. Whereas social pluralism comes forward and states, are we all able to live in a society where we can tolerate each other's beliefs? This idea of social pluralism is vital. Why? Us as human beings have 3 A's in common with each other and 4 Q's which are always surrounding ourselves. 3 A's and 4 Q's? What do I mean? With the 3 A's, there isn't but a single human being, Christian, Jew, Hindu, Sikh, who analyzes the world around them, who assesses the universe that surrounds them, and who at the end argues for a point which they believe in. If you look at any human being, they either argue, analyze, or assess. As in, there isn't a single human being on this earth, but then they may assess what surrounds them, analyze the doctrines that are around them, and then argue for them. Whether you're a Christian or a Jew, a Hindu or a Muslim, you'll go through a period of your life of assessing, arguing, and analyzing. At the same time, whether you're a Christian or Muslim, a Jew or a Hindu, a Buddhist or a Sikh, or even an atheist, there'll be 4 questions which you'll always ask. The first is a metaphysical question. The second is a cosmological question. The third is a psychological question. And the fourth is an ethical question. These 4 questions surround every human being, irrespective of the theology they've decided to take up in their lives. The metaphysical question: is there an unseen force that originated everything, which I cannot see but clearly makes sense to be part of my life, which my heart feels, which my eyes may not ascertain? A cosmological question: how did this universe begin? Was it through this Big Bang? Was there something before it? Was it accidental? Is there a theory? A psychological question: what's my role in this world as a human being? An ethical question, which is how do I deal with other human beings? You bring me a Christian or bring me a Sikh in Toronto today, they'll tell you these are 4 questions which I've pondered over either for a second in my life, or for a day in my life, or for months in my life, or for years in my life. You didn't have to belong to the religion of Islam to ponder over these issues. Therefore, if you didn't have to belong to the religion of Islam to ponder on these issues, it means that the religion of Islam has to espouse, and the Muslims have to put forward, a doctrine of social pluralism, where we are able to find more in common with our fellow citizens rather than differences. Where we are able to find more common denominators rather than issues of argument and debate. And that's why the Quran quite beautifully espouses social pluralism in a time where one may argue Christianity and Judaism wasn't giving much freedom to the minorities. You find within the Quran, first God wants this social pluralist aspect where you bring your common denominators together. Where Allah says in the Quran, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. First God, what does He show us? He shows us in each society what you have. You have males, females, tribes, races. Automatically you have something in common. You all recognize you're from the same species. Not only from the same species, you all have your own respected tribes and your respected races. Then further than that, God wanted to take it even a step further. He said, once you've recognized this and you're building an Islamic state, be tolerant of the minorities in that state. Because the same way you, O Prophet, asked people to ponder over the metaphysical and the cosmological and the ethical and the psychological, so too did those people of the minorities. So the Quran came forward and said, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا. Say, O people of the book, come. Oh Muhammad, don't push them away. Your religion was a religion which was able to allow people to be encompassed, not pushed. يا أهل الكتاب تعالوا إلى كلمة سواء بيننا وبينكم أن لا نعبد إلا الله ولا نشرك به شيئا ولا يتخذ بعضنا بعضا أربابا من دون الله. O people of the book, come to a joint word. Look at the concept of social pluralism. Come to a joint word between us and you. We will worship no one but God. We will not put partners to God. And we will not take lawgivers besides God. The moment the Prophet was able to deconstruct mankind, notice, when the Prophet looked at the human, he didn't look at him and say, that person over there is a kafir, he has no space in my world. Rather, he used the phrase, that person over there is a potential Muslim, he has space in my world. Further than that, what did he do? He then would say, according to the commands of the Quran, the Prophet would come and be told by his Lord, you'll find وَلَتَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّا نَصَارَى ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ مِنْهُمْ قِسِّيسِينَ وَرُهْبَانًا وَأَنَّهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. O Prophet of God, you will find the closest people in reciprocal love to you are those who call themselves the Nasara, the Christians. Why? Notice what Islam was looking for. Because their theology is strong? No. Because they had great leaders in the past? No. Was it because they have a great following? No. Because their priests and their monks are humble human beings. وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ تَرَى أَعْيُنَهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ. When they hear what has come down to our Prophet, you'll see their eyes will overflow with tears. You see the origin of this religion? It wasn't an origin of hatred to people of other beliefs. It was an origin which looked for the areas of other beliefs which we had in common and wanted the heart to embrace each other, not just the minds. And that's why I tell you something. When you look at the Prophet in his early days, wasn't it an Abyssinian priest who helped his religion? Was it anyone but an Abyssinian Christian priest by the name of Najashi who helped his religion? I ask you, was Najashi's theology the same as the Prophet? Or was Najashi's principles the same as the Prophet's? We today are only looking at theological conclusions. We've forgotten the principle of what makes us humans. We today focus on human doings, and we're not being human beings. There's a difference. There's many human doings. Do this, do that. If he doesn't do that, he's not a Muslim. If he does that, he is a Muslim. If he doesn't do that, he's a kafir. If he does this, he's a Muslim. No. Focus on them being. The reason they were called human being is they still have potential to be. They have that ability to rise. And that's why the Prophet would tell those who surrounded him of the minorities, you're more than welcome to worship within your own churches. We as a religion don't have a problem. Rather, we as a religion want to welcome you to our beliefs. Do you remember when he takes Hassan and Hussein and Fatima and Ali to the Christians of Najran? Does he need to? Doesn't need to. He's got many great companions. He doesn't need to take his family members. But there was a small point being made in the undertone of the incident of Mubahala. It's as if Allah was saying, I want you to introduce these 5, not just to those people outside of this religion, but to any people outside of this religion. If Hassan is 6 or Hussein is 5 or Zainab is 4, if Ali and his wife are still in their youth, it does not matter. I'm taking these 5 not just for Mubahala, but as a message to all of you that I want you one day to take these 5 and give them to the world as well. And that's why when we look at you look at the quotes of AhlulBayt, you'll find from the outset, they espouse a social pluralism which endeavors to bring tolerance. When Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen says, our enemies are not the Christians and the Jews. Our enemies, our own ignorance. Look at that line. Phenomenal line. Ali ibn Abi Talib absolutely rips humanity back to its essence. He tells the Muslim, oh Muslim, you put the blame on the Christians and the Jews. They're not your enemies, it's your ignorance. Had you practiced this religion the way the Lord asked you, there wouldn't be a problem with any other faith. Rather, you're the one who's pushing people away. The same Amir al-Mu'mineen comes and says, in other lines, oh mankind, he tells Malik al-Ashtar, know that the people of Egypt are of 2 types. They are either your brothers in faith or your equals in humanity.
Again, the lines were lines of social pluralism. In other words, what were AhlulBayt saying? Give our words to anyone and you'll find that there'll be a society of tolerance if they apply them. And that's why if you were to take these words, look at the number of philosophers, historians, academicians, politicians who were affected by the household of the Prophet. They weren't of the religion of Islam, but the principles of the household affected them. Let's start, for example, with let's start with the political world. Many times Gandhi is quoted for his reverence of Imam al-Hussein. But the first person Gandhi revered was the Prophet himself, then Imam al-Hussein. Unfortunately, on many occasions when you hear Gandhi's reverence, you only hear that Gandhi revered Imam al-Hussein. Go back to Gandhi's biography. Gandhi himself has a line where he says, many people say to me that Muhammad spread his religion by the sword. With this I disagree. It was his simplicity, his pledges, and how he would keep them, his devotion to his family and his friends that allowed Muhammad's religion to spread so far and wide. Then he said, listen to these lines, when I finished the second volume on the biography of the Prophet, and I realized the book was only made up of 2 volumes, I felt a sadness like I never felt in my life before. Imagine. But what's Gandhi saying here? Did he say that the Prophet is a great prophet because of Salah, because of Sawm? No, look at the principles he's looking at. Pledges, and he kept them. He didn't let his people down when he made an oath with them. He didn't stab his people in the back. He wasn't treacherous with his people. Simplicity. He'd talk with the poorest man like Bilal, and he'd speak with the richest of his community like Mus'ab. Then devotion to family and friends. Did he ever seek to allow his friends to be let down? On the contrary, even when his friends were rude to him, you found Muhammad's heart was merciful back to them. Even when friends told him words which we don't want to bring, you'd still find him saying, oh Allah, forgive them for what they have said. Gandhi says, that to me is the Prophet. Don't tell me anything else. Tell me Muhammad's simplicity, I'll say to you, that's the religion I want to follow. Tell me his keeping of pledges, I want to follow that. Tell me devotion to family and friends, that's what I want to follow. Then he moves on to Imam Hussein. What does he say? He says with Imam Hussein, I learned how to achieve victory while being oppressed through the lesson of Imam Hussein. Notice that Gandhi says, my first salt march, I took 72 people with me. Shall I tell you something, brothers and sisters? Do you know Obama was affected by Gandhi, and John Lennon's music was affected by Gandhi? And do you know that there are others like Luther King who were affected by Gandhi? And do you know that the UN General Assembly on October the 2nd says a non-violence day in honor of Gandhi? I tell you, if Obama learned from Gandhi, and Luther King learned from Gandhi, and you find Mandela learned from Gandhi, I ask you, who did Gandhi learn from? That's the point. The problem is when the Muslims speak of Gandhi, they don't relate the people to tell them, come back, let me tell you who Gandhi learned from. Gandhi says, I learned how to achieve victory while being oppressed through Imam Hussein. Then he took it a step further. He said, people tell me that it was the sword of the believers that saved Islam. He said, no, the progress of the religion of Islam was because of the stance of Imam al-Hussein on the 10th of Muharram. The stance. Which stance? Enjoining the good and forbidding the evil isn't a Muslim stance, it's not a Christian stance, it's not a Jewish stance, it's not a Sikh stance, it's a humanitarian stance. Then further than that, not only Gandhi, look at someone like Ranjiv Gandhi. Someone would say Ranjiv Gandhi was affected by AhlulBayt. Ranjiv Gandhi himself used to say, whenever a cabinet minister is brought into my cabinet in the new post, I would always say to him that the first thing I want you to do would be to read the letter of Imam Ali to Malik al-Ashtar and Nahj al-Balagha. You think he would say, no, I want you, for example, to be able to write the contracts, assess the meeting and so on. No. Read the letter of Ali to Malik and try and implement it as much as you can. Because in that letter, if we can achieve half of what Ali wants in a just government, our government will be remembered forever. Oh mankind, when you're in politics, oh Malik, have mercy on the people in the way you'd want Allah to have mercy on you. Forgive the people in the way you'd want Allah to forgive you. Oh Malik, do not employ those people who have been under despotic regimes into your government. Ranjiv Gandhi is a politician. Yet look at Ranjiv Gandhi in the world of politics. To him, only one man explains just governments, and that's Amir al-Mu'mineen. So you have, for example, in the world, and then Nehru, longest serving Prime Minister of India. Nehru says, when they asked him, who's affected you the most in your life? He said, Hussein, son of Ali, affected me more than any other human being. He said, what do you mean? That he replied by saying, Imam al-Hussein, his sacrifice at Karbala does not belong to a people. Rather, it belongs to every people. It belongs to every nation and is the path of righteousness. When Nehru said this, someone could have easily turned around and say, why is the Hindu talking about our religion? They are people who are outside of our religion. On the contrary, a Hindu is like me in the sense that they have questions to ask, where they want to assess, and they want to analyze, and they want to argue. They have metaphysical and cosmological and ethical as well as psychological questions. When they hear the words of a man like Hussein, he didn't need to be a Muslim or a Hindu. To them, his principles were what lived on forever. Therefore, you find in the world of politics these personalities. Then in the world, for example, of academia, 2 professors of Cambridge until today are revered the most when it comes to Oriental studies. One, Edward Brown, the second, Simon Oakley. Many of the students of Cambridge would in one way or the other have studied their works on Oriental history, Arab and Oriental thought. You find with the both of them, they bring about an unbelievable line about how they were inspired by Imam al-Hussein or indeed by AhlulBayt as a whole. Do you know what Oakley says? Oakley says 2 lines on the 10th of Muharram were enough to bring about a relationship between me and God. So they said to him, which 2 lines? He said, Hussein lies on the ground with arrows surrounding his body. He has no one to support him. You'd think he'd turn to God and say, why me? What have I done wrong to you? I haven't hurt anyone in my life. You'd think he may even doubt his Lord. You'd think he may even question whether his Lord exists, because some of us humans, one thing goes wrong and we start questioning. But he says, listen to him whispering to his Lord, oh my Lord, you are my confidence in all of my troubles, and you are my hope in all of my adversities. Look at those lines. You are my confidence in all my troubles and my hope in all my adversity. He says, have you ever seen a man have such love at a moment when you would think the human would have hatred? But then Edward Gibbon takes it a step further, again inspired by Hussein. This is no disrespect meant to Rasulullah, to Amir al-Mu'mineen, but it's phenomenal. How many non-Muslims Imam al-Hussein has meant something to them in their life, in the past and until today. Edward Gibbon, do you know what he says? Edward Brown, he comes forward and he says that in the killing of Imam al-Hussein, these lines are unbelievable, because the apologetics in our community who constantly question our love and our expression of our love for Imam al-Hussein, listen to the lines of a professor at Cambridge. You'd think he'd be the first to say that, you know what, these people are barbaric honoring this man and the way they honor him. He says no. He says the killing of Imam al-Hussein evokes in the most lukewarm and heedless human being the deepest emotion, a frantic expression of grief, an exaltation of the spirit, where pain, death, danger shrink into unconsidered trifles. Just listen to these lines. In the most lukewarm and heedless of people. Do you know what he meant by that? He said, bring me the riffraff of society, the uneducated, the one who's got no emotion, the one who's got no religion. Bring me all of them. I'll make you see that when they hear what happened to Hussein, and the way he stood up against what happened, even them, it will evoke in them the deepest emotion. Then what? A frantic expression of grief. Please listen to those words. When people come and say, what's all these people, the Azadari, they're doing? They're going a bit crazy, these people. They haven't understood the love of Imam al-Hussein. We should channel it in a different way. I reply back to them by saying that on the contrary, that love for Abu Abdullah is a love which is part of a heat that will never subside. That this non-Muslim has turned around and said, I do understand if there's a frantic expression of grief. Because when you see a human who's so pure, but being so soft with his opposition, and they still want to behead him, I can understand if a human shows frantic expression of grief. Then he says, where death, danger and pain, they shrink. Normally, if you were about to face death, you'd normally look at it and you're scared. Pain, you're scared. Danger, you're scared. How many human beings do you know when they saw death and they remembered Hussein, they didn't show any fear? Or when they saw danger and they remembered Hussein, there was no fear. Or when they saw pain and they remembered Hussein, there was no fear. So what does Edward Brown say? Edward Brown studied in Cambridge. I guarantee you, if I as a speaker, or any of the respected speakers here, who were sitting on the pulpit and said that, you know what, there's no problem showing a great expression of grief, people would say, look at these people, they're extreme. But when the head of Cambridge's Arabic and History Society says this, then suddenly people take notice. What does Brown say? He says, I'm not surprised because such a man's principles, they will express grief in this way. Therefore you find people from the world of academia, then people from the world of philosophy. Emerson, until today, is studied as one of the greatest 19th century philosophers. The transcendental movement and the individual thought of Emerson is still revered by many in America and indeed around the world today, to the extent that many philosophy students have to study Ralph Waldo Emerson and his thought. Emerson says, no man affected me in terms of his principles about how to understand God's sustenance like Ali, son of Abu Talib. Emerson. Who would have thought Emerson would have been affected in this way? Emerson says, Ali has one line to his son Hassan, which explained to me the whole meaning of rizq. You know rizq? Sustenance. He says, Ali says, oh my son Hassan, know that sustenance is of two types. There is a sustenance you run after and a sustenance it runs after you. Isn't that true? In our life, isn't there a sustenance we have to wake up at 7 in the morning for and go to sleep at 7 in the evening and come back home at 7 in the evening for? But then there's a sustenance which runs after us, which God has written. Emerson says, I've studied every philosopher and thinker and historian in history. Yet I have not found a man who is a philosopher and a historian and a thinker at the same time like Ali, son of Abu Talib. That in one moment and one line, the whole of the meaning of sustenance in mankind's life was explained by him as a Lebanese Christian. Antoine Bara, what does he say? He says that no battle has evoked as much sympathy and admiration. And there is so many lessons to learn from, like the battle of Karbala and the message of Imam Hussein. Lebanese Christian? Why would you be affected? Hussein's a Muslim. You're a Christian. No, the lessons of Karbala are human lessons. When Hur came back and asked for forgiveness, you never needed to be a Muslim to be affected by that conversation between him and Hussein, did you? You could have been any religion and to see the man who blocked the water from your path and then you tell him, I forgive you, do not worry. You don't need to be a member of the religion of Islam. You can be any human being and learn about forgiveness from that one line. You see the way you give your sons away. You don't need to be a Muslim to learn the meaning of sacrifice. You don't need to be a Muslim to understand what it means to give water to a horse because a horse is thirsty. Aren't these all lessons for mankind? Antoine Bara says, I learned that there's not as many lessons to be learned in any battle but the battle of Karbala. What did we make Karbala today? How much can an audience cry is how great the speaker is. Didn't we? The greater the masa'ib, the more powerful the speaker. Yes, but how about 45 minutes of content, of humanitarian lessons, of lessons on intellect and ethics and theology and spirituality? No, it's Muharram. I don't want to hear these things. I want to cry. I haven't cried for a few months and things have been quite bad in life, so just make me cry. You find that what happened here, you find that when he got affected by Karbala, Antoine of the Christian faith was saying what? You Shia, you Muslims, all of you have got the lessons of Karbala. Focus on them, because these lessons are admirable lessons which every human in the world. And that's why you find someone in the world of literature like Charles Dickens saying, if Hussein went out for the world, why take his sisters? Why take his sons? Why take his nephews? He said Hussein's rise was a godly rise for the sake of the service of humanity. And that's why you find with the world of philosophy, with the world of literature, with the world of history, non-Muslims, people like Nehru and Gandhi and Emerson and Brown, and people like Oakley, nothing to do with the religion. But the principles of this religion were always meant to be for every human being. And that's why someone may ask, okay, but these are 18th century figures. No, they're 19th century figures. No, said Ammar, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Some of them 17th, 16th, maybe some in the mid-20th. Give us someone contemporary. You know, I looked for someone contemporary last year when I was doing research as to whether a non-Muslim who lives a real fantastic material life would be affected by AhlulBayt. Gandhi didn't live a material life. He could be affected. Others didn't live a material life. Then I came across one person who left everything and more you could have in this world because of AhlulBayt and the principles of AhlulBayt. Imagine you're the inheritor to the dynasty which owns Lamborghini. It's not a bad life, is it? It's alright, I suppose. And, oh sorry, by the way, your dad also owns Ferrari. So, that's not bad as well. And Alfa Romeo and Fiat, the companies, are just side companies. You know, if anyone wants them, they're more than welcome. And you know all this Gucci and Prada and the houses of Dior and Vuitton? Yeah, his dad owns the buildings for them in Milan and Rome. It's alright. It would be useful. Further than that, the banks in Rome are all his dad's. And Juventus Football Club, the famous Juventus, that's his dad's side hobby. So the fortune he was going to inherit wasn't too much. It was only $60 billion. And someone will say, but would it be shared? No, it wouldn't, because he's the only son. So what was this dynasty called? The Agnelli dynasty in Italy. The Agnellis are the most powerful family in Italy. That's what they own. And sometimes if they're feeling bored, they may give one of those companies away to their friends. So sometimes you don't want your Ferrari, so you give them as birthday presents to friends. This Eduardo was his dad's beloved son. All he knows about is Catholicism, and he goes to study in Princeton. He's going to study religion and philosophy in Princeton. He comes across the Quran. When he comes across the Quran, he has never seen principles espoused ethically like the principles of the Quran. The principles about parents, and the principles about neighbors, and the principles about sons and daughters and family life, they have a profound effect on him. When he returns from Princeton to Rome, he wants to go to the Iranian embassy. Why? Because he hears that the great, and so on, grandson of the man who bought the Quran has just done a revolution in Iran. And he wants to go to the embassy. Why? Because the great, and so on, grandson has a purity in his face which has affected him. So he's wondered, if that's the purity 1,000 years later, then how was the purity of the ones he came from? So he went to the Iranian embassy on a Sunday. So he's knocked at the door, security guards come out. How can I help you? He says, I want to see the ambassador. He says to him, sorry, who are you? He says, tell him Eduardo Agnelli. So he goes to tell the ambassador, Mr. Iranian ambassador has just woken up that day. So he's like, tell him Sunday is my day off. So the security said to him, sir, it's Agnelli. So which Agnelli? He said, Agnelli. He said, as in Agnelli? He said, Agnelli. He said, Fiat, Agnelli, Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Juventus, all the banks, all the designers. Agnelli. He said, tell him we don't have any days off at this embassy. He's more than welcome to come inside. So when he came in, he said to him, why did you tell me the door was closed? He said, you know, it's a Sunday. He said, Allah's doors are always open. Agnelli tells the ambassador, Allah's doors are always open. And then he says to him, I want to ask you something. That Khomeini is from the line of the family of the Prophet? He said to him, yes. He said, and I read that they were 1,300 years back or so? He said, yes. He said, so if he's from the line, then how pure is the essence of that line? He said, I want to know more about the family. I've read in the Quran, but something alongside the Quran is missing. And surely it's the message of Ali and his sons that I want to adopt. They said to him, but Agnelli, what if your dad finds out? Your dad's from the hierarchy of Italy and a Catholic. He said, let all that wealth of the world go, because I have the wealth of holding on to Hussein, son of Ali. Look at that line. I tell you, can we leave wealth like that? His dad disowned him. At the end, he was poverty-stricken. He couldn't afford money to go from a taxi from one place to the other. Imagine. The son of that dynasty left all of this. Until a few years back, they said Eduardo Agnelli committed suicide because of jumping off a bridge on his way to his dad's home. Suicide? As in when there's one inheritor to the royal throne, to that particular throne, it was suicide what he did? Ask anyone who saw him in Rome and also in Iran from the scholars who met him. They will all say to you that he kept in touch with us in Laylatul Qadr. He would read the dua in Muharram. He'd organize the majalis. He'd give money from himself regularly. But at the end, they couldn't take the fact that a member of their family may come out and say he's Muslim, and they finished him off completely. But what's the principle? Did Agnelli look at a group of Muslims who wanted to push him away? No. He looked at a purity of an Islamic belief where the principles of justice and rising against oppression and speaking out for the truth and the ethical values of the religion, that's what made Agnelli leave everything and come towards Islam. And that's why through a person like Agnelli teaches us a lesson that never ever think a non-Muslim cannot be affected by AhlulBayt. Show me a non-Muslim far away from Al Muhammad, but I'll show you the truth of Al Muhammad will reverberate in their hearts. And that's why the famous Hindu philosopher Dr. Krishnan, when he says in his lines, although Hussein died 1,300 years ago, the indestructible soul of Hussein still rules the hearts of many. Let's make sure that that soul of Hussein remains alive in our actions. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.